So, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. So, if you're joining us over on the twitch.tv channel on Friday night, then thanks so much for tuning in. Please do take an active part in the chat below. Don't forget to give the channel a follow because it's greatly appreciated. And of course, you'll get notified when we go live with new content. But if you're watching us on catch up over on YouTube, thanks so much for watching. Hope you find this video useful. Please don't forget to subscribe. Leave us some comments if you like and feedback. It would be ever so useful. Thanks for watching. Okay, so my next guest, he's a senior technologist working with Veeam Software and Casting at the moment, and he's a hugely active member of the community, and he's contributed a hell of a lot over the last, at least year that I've been watching him, with his public speaking and the engagement that he's had across the social media platforms. He's always been on hand to share his knowledge and experience around workload virtualization, storage, data protection, as well as looking at business continuity and disaster recovery planning techniques and the methods that surround those. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome my next guest on In Conversation With is Mr. Michael Cade. Hello, Michael. How you doing?
Hi, John. Yeah, all good. Thanks. You?
Yeah, really good. Thanks. Obviously getting through these videos now. Really enjoy doing them. So no, thanks so much for agreeing to come on and having a chat to me today. So before we kick on, I don't know, I gave you a little bit of an intro there, but I don't know if you want to start off by just giving yourself a little bit more of an introduction, where you're working, what you're up to these days. That would be cool.
Yeah, nice one. Yeah, so Michael Cade, as John said. So I've been at Veeam for just over 6 years now. Long time to be talking about backup, right? When backup's pretty boring overall. Anyway, but my focus there is very much on technical community, which is why I'm so busy, noisy, and everything over the socials, over Twitter, over YouTube as well, and all of that good stuff. Also a massive focus around technical content. So how do we do it? Why do we do it? What are the problems out there? I think they call it thought leadership a lot of the time as well, in that looking ahead as to what are some of the challenges that we're going to have from a technology point of view and how technology can solve them, rather than just coming up with the willy-nilly buzzwords that we know and love in our lovely industry. Is that we actually have to put pen to paper and make something stick, and that's kind of my job, is helping define the strategy of the product within our company. So a bit like a liaison officer, I speak to a lot of the community, get feedback on product, where we should be going, speak to a lot of customers, prospects, partners, alliances, basically I'll speak to anyone. And it's about getting that feedback, getting it back into our product management, and hopefully we'll keep pushing until something happens. And
no, absolutely. No, makes so much, and it's great to see, to be honest, Michael. I think it's one of those things for me personally, like when you see new technology coming out and you see other vendors releasing product sets, sometimes it can be a distraction. Where does that sit in the grand scheme of things? What does that particular feature do? And, how does it overlap native features in cloud platforms? So I was really keen to speak to you, obviously, about Veeam specifically, and then you introduced me to Cas10 as well, which I'm sure we'll get onto a little bit later in this session. But I mean, just looking at the kind of the business continuity, Veeam is one of those vendors that has been around for a long time now. I've used it in the past in previous jobs, and it just seems to be one of those game changer vendors in terms, certainly in data protection and backup and replication technologies. So I thought it would be a great idea if you just wanted to start off really just taking us through, looking at cloud platforms, not necessarily just Azure, but of course, the cloud agnostic term. Where does Veeam sit at the moment, Michael, in terms of that disaster recovery or that replication of workloads? What does it have to offer, I guess?
I think it's a super interesting world. So when I first joined Veeam, we were very much, so 6 years ago, 6+ years ago, Veeam was very much focused on virtualization, right? So before I joined Veeam, I was an infrastructure admin for a large consultancy. We were looking after data center, and it was always, I was a virtualization and storage consultant. That's my background on that. Mm-hmm. And it was very much a choice then, whether it was Microsoft Hyper-V, maybe there was a bit of Citrix Zen Server. Shout out to anyone that still is running that. God bless them. And anyone, and then it was like vSphere, right? So virtualization gave us a lot of options. I think it's fair to say that VMware kind of won the virtualization race, and that was very much it for the next probably 5 to 10 years. Now we've got these cloud instances. We've got so many choices on where we can run. Like, I think you mentioned it, John, maybe just now, but I know you've mentioned it on other shows as well, is that even in Azure, you have so many different options of where and what to run and how to run certain workloads, as to where's the abstraction layer and what do you want to control? What do you need to control, and what do you want to pay for? And so to get back onto the Veeam bit, is that, so 6 years ago, very much focused on virtualization, but Veeam, like the amount of platforms that we've now got, the overwhelming choice that we have, obviously Veeam has to stay up to date with that. We have to be able to protect not only those workloads, physical workloads as well, they're not going away, but also think about cloud IaaS, PaaS, etc. All of them need some level of data protection when it comes to it as well. So Veeam, when you would have been playing with it, John, would have been like one product focusing on backup and replication of your workloads. Now we've got a whole platform that is focused on protecting workloads, whether it's still virtualization, physical, whether it's cloud, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, whether it's Office 365, whether it's Kubernetes in any of the variants that come from. And then there's also monitoring and visibility into all of those areas. And then so many other areas around service providers. How does service providers then leverage Veeam to offer and do more as a service? Yeah, so we've got a whole platform of products that.
Yeah, I think before we started recording this session, now obviously that was one of the things on it. You were saying, well, we made a little bit of a list here of the things that we can do, and you're right, to be honest, Michael. I think it was that backup and replication service that integrated with VMware was. Don't get me wrong. Of course, I've kept up to a certain extent with what Veeam is offering at the moment, but it's just, you know what it's like. Unless you're physically there dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, I mean, I like to say, you probably don't really know that product in the slightest, so. It would be cool to kind of understand. I mean, I suppose the question is, where should we start? Is it a case that Veeam comes as, do you want to describe how, I don't know, is it right to start at licensing, but is it right, or maybe the architecture of Veeam product, as a product, is it a one product thing, or do you buy, are they different products that you bolt on? How does all that piece together, Michael?
So we can get rid of the licensing thing and see your viewers dive, but hopefully not, because it's actually really simple. Because one of the traits that we have at Veeam, without this being a sales pitch at all, it's not meant for that. But one of the things that I'd always look for is simplicity. So one is, well, we have a free product. So everything that we talk about today. Yeah, everything we talk about today, there'll be a community edition or a free edition. And that really is aimed at us guys. It's aimed at the community. It's aimed at people that like to tinker around with technology, wherever that is. I know we've all done stuff in our home labs, in public clouds now, as they're so accessible. We might need to protect that workload. So first and foremost, bottom of the run from a licensing point of view, there's always a free option. And then we move into things like the Veeam Universal license, because those workloads can freely move, or the idea of being able to move a workload from on-premises into Microsoft Azure as a VM and back again, or being able to migrate that into a different location, but not having to be punished by having to move those. So what I mean by that is that you don't need to go and buy Veeam Backup for Azure to protect 10 Azure virtual machines, and then go and buy Veeam Backup for VMware for 10 virtual machines. And if you move them, you don't have to go and buy a new license. That universal license follows the instance with it. So wherever that may be, they're protected. So very simple licensing model from that point of view. And I'm going to be quiet on licensing. When it gets down into architecture, everything is, so this is the, as well. So there's three things that we focus on at Veeam from a product strategy point of view. It has to be simple, has to be flexible, and it has to be reliable. Simple obviously from a licensing point of view, as I just mentioned, it also has to be simple in terms of getting things up and running. I already mentioned that backup's a bit boring. It's always last on the list. No one ever wants to be a backup engineer. No one ever wants to be just focused on backup.
Until that point comes where everybody wishes they were.
Yeah,
and everybody's running around.
Then you ride in on your white horse and you're the hero.
Exactly.
When you restore everything. But so all of the products that we end up talking about, or the solutions that we end up talking about throughout the call, they're all standard. They can all be standalone, or they can all be managed centrally by the Veeam backup and replication server.
Okay.
Or they will be. The roadmap is very short in terms of when that fully is baked in. But from a Microsoft point of view, we're pretty much there. So like that, exactly. We can have a standalone license sits over all of that. You protect the workloads that you have. You have a centralized way of being able to look after all of those machines, those workloads, that data, being able to send it to the public cloud from a capacity tier point of view. Leveraging Microsoft Azure Blob Storage, archive tier, so for longer term storage as well. There's a lot, and I guess the easiest way to put this is that, so I've kind of touched on the platform in order to protect the workload, but then there's also new requirements around where do we need to store that data, why should we store it, the whole saying around should we be putting this to tape, people wanting to move away from tape, what's the next alternative to that, is around object storage, potentially for some people are still very much into tape, and that's fine, we support that as well, but object storage is like the hottest thing for storing your backups in. So over the last 18 months or 2 years now, we've been really focused on how do we leverage that object storage to be as efficient and as cost effective to store those backups in as well.
With you. I mean, in terms of, I mean, that's great. I mean, and I agree. I think, looking back at what Veeam was when I last used it, even back then, it was very much about that product that was just simple to kind of get installed, get up and running, and pretty intuitive, really. Just, there's my VM, and I want to back it up and replicate it to there, and that's what I remember Veeam. And like I say, it's not that I'm apologizing for not using the product. I think one of the main reasons I wanted to have a chat with you is, it seems that I probably should be wanting to use the product. You know what I mean? From the good stuff that I've seen you do. So I mean, in terms of, let's just talk about the Azure functionality, I guess. I mean, I know there's going to be lots of bells and whistles, but at its most basic form, I suppose, are we talking around the product is still there at its heart about that replication of a VM or a disk image into some capacity into Azure? I mean, maybe can we talk about the different options that Veeam might give us in that instance, and then maybe look at the data side? So I'm assuming there's this file and folder level data backup and retention piece, and any other gaps.
So one of the features that we have specifically around Azure, so I mentioned so Veeam has the ability to protect physical machines, Windows, Linux agents. We have the ability to protect virtualization on premises, so your Nutanix HVs, your Hyper-Vs, your vSphere, VMware vSphere, all of those virtual machines, and as well as being able to protect IaaS workloads within the public cloud. So whether that's Azure VMs, AWS EC2, Google Cloud, Google Cloud Compute instances, being able to back them up. And what we do is we protect them all into the same file format called a VBK format, which is exactly the same as what you would have known back in the day, John. Nothing's changed, but they all write into that same file format. Now, the nature of that file format is that can be stored anywhere. That can be, think of it as a file system within a file system. So we don't really care where you store it. So that can be, we're agnostic to that. We don't care whether it sits on direct attached storage. We don't care whether it sits on dedupe devices, NAS, SAN, like you name it, we can potentially put that backup file there. So that's a benefit in itself. So when we go back to the architecture question as to, well, what does Veeam look like? Well, it's software only. So the management has to live on Windows still today. but the workhorses, they can now be Windows or Linux. So the idea of being able to move data, the data movers, as I should say, they could be Windows or Linux. So take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And they can be scaled out accordingly depending on the size of the environment. So that's how the scalability in the architecture looks at a very, very high level. But in terms of that VBK, we can take that, and even if it's come from, it's a VMware virtual machine, let's say it's a Windows box that we've backed up, we can take that VBK and we can directly restore that into our Azure subscription as an Azure VM. So you choose whether that is what VM size that is. You choose the memory, the CPU, all linking into the Azure APIs to be able to achieve what you want or how it needs to look when it gets to Azure. So we have that ability. Obviously, the laws of physics mean that we have to actually move some data from A to B. So that depends on link speed up into. But yeah, that gives us the opportunity to, and this has been there for a good 3 years now, direct restore to Microsoft Azure. And I think at the very beginning of that was very much around test and development as a use case, or we're going to see what it looks like. We're going to go and play with it in Azure as a bit of a playground, because we can spin it up, we can throw it away, we don't care about it. We don't have to then go and invest in a second test and dev type infrastructure on-prem. And then I think even more, probably in the last year or so, especially in the last year in 2020, has been very much a focus around migration, but also disaster recovery or failure recovery. So being able to get data up and running as quick as possible. Links have obviously got much better, even in the last 12 months. I don't know about yours, John, but my internet has like doubled in speed and capacity,
absolutely.
even with the pandemic, right? So businesses have had exactly the same kind of experience, in that things are getting faster, things are getting better from that infrastructure point of view or connectivity point of view. So it then makes that laws of physics a little bit more approachable and a bit easier to get that workload up and running in the public cloud, whether that be Azure or AWS, but Azure in particular, obviously we're talking about. So more and more are using that. And I wouldn't say it's an end game to get it into Azure as an Azure VM, but it's a good start to then start refactoring that into PaaS or whatever that needs to look like. And I always think if you're looking at Azure VMs as your end game, IaaS as your end game for your database servers, you probably need to educate yourself around PaaS and what other options are there especially in Azure, right? So.
No, I mean, it's just, I mean, it's cool to hear, actually. I mean, in terms of using Veeam to do that replication almost in a migration way, a little bit like, Azure Site Recovery is to a certain extent, I presume, where you're replicating that particular VM, whether it's a VM or a physical box from a data center into Azure. I mean, in terms of sort of the intelligence baked around the Veeam product, Michael, how intelligent is it when you're kind of cutting over that VM, or is it an offline thing that you do where you back up and replicate the VM, or is there some intelligence baked in? Where are they with that?
So there is no change block tracking API that enables us to get, well, as far as I know anyway, there's no way of being able to understand. So if we take our backup and we replicate and we use direct restore to Azure to get that machine up and running in Azure, then 2 days later we take another backup on-prem and we want to sync the changes up into the Azure VM that we have. I don't believe that there's an API that enables us to hook into that to enable that to happen. So it's a full-blown copy backup.
Yeah, no. To be honest, I think where I was getting at with that was, in terms that you've got a workload, for the migration journey. That, I mean, okay, let's start off the basics that you want to get out of a data center. So you're backing up and replicating a VM, and you're kind of cutting it over. If I kind of reference it towards Azure Site Recovery, where you've got that kind of recovery plan that you can put in place, where it shuts that machine down and brings it up in Azure. I mean, is that where Veeam's going with that product set at the moment?
So on top of that, so from a migration point of view, everything can be scripted to be able to do that. There's nothing in the UI that allows us to schedule that per se. But then we also have another product called Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator.
Okay.
which is ultimately, it's built for VMware, but it's a great orchestration engine that allows you to feed in. It's basically the if this then that of
With you.
backup. So if I want to do this and I want to do it on a daily basis, or I want to do it before, I want to do it at this time and I want to do it daily, and I want it to clear up the mess from yesterday and I want it to go again, it's that orchestrated approach, automation as well in there to be able to do that. So
yeah, I mean, what are you seeing Veeam customers doing and using the product for? You know what it's like sometimes when vendors release a product, I've seen it, I can't think of examples, but sometimes the product gets used in a way that you think, well, actually, it wasn't necessarily designed for that, but you found quite a niche use for it. Are you seeing anything like that with Veeam in terms of, you know, I don't know. I mean, what kind of customers have Veeam got at the moment? Are they traditional on-prem data center kind of customers that are looking to kind of take that first leap into the cloud platform, or are they just trying to use cloud as the backup location, or is it all of the above sort of thing?
So yeah, it's basically everything. But so there's two interesting points. In fact, the first point, John, is exactly the reason why I love Veeam, because the amount of features that we release and then we find that customers are using it for a completely different reason is amazing. I feel like the innovation, yes, obviously there's a lot of innovation from us from an engineering point of view, but the innovative imagination of some of our customers is awesome. So one of the project, and that's also one of our key jobs as well, is go and find what the art of the possible is. What can you do? So I've been working a lot around data classification and understanding what that data is. So Veeam has a way of indexing. We understand a lot of the top level of the file. Like we know what a doc file is, we know what an MP3 is, and we index that. Great. But what about the context inside of that doc file? What about understanding what that unstructured data looks like as well? That's where, well, we don't have that, but we have some, but we'd like to understand that. Well, we have some functionality that allows us to expose the NAS backups out to a secondary location, a data classification engine, to then, well, you give me that information. You give me that PII or that,
cool. Okay.
that stuff.
Yeah.
So
you're able to classify your backups as well, or not just take it from your original data source, I guess.
Exactly that. So you're putting that data to work, and this is the Veeam Data Lab story that I've been telling for the last 3 years. Is backup. I've already said that. I've said this. I can only say it one more time. Backup is boring. Recovery is where it gets a little bit more exciting because we want to be able to recover as fast as possible. But they're kind of table stakes. We can only move data as fast as we can move data. It doesn't matter what vendor you are. That's the case. Recovery, yes, some vendors move it very quick. Some of them maybe as quick. But ultimately, all we care about is can we recover the data in the time that we need it. Where the differentiator comes in from a Veeam point of view is, well, now what else can I do with that data? So rather than it just sitting there and landing in a certain storage, whatever that storage may be, object storage, whether it be NAS, DAS, SAN, etc., what can I do with it? Can I understand? Can I classify that data? Could I make sure that there's no ransomware sat stagnant in there? Can I put it to work and actually understand, well, that data hasn't been touched for 3 years. So why am I backing it up? Why am I spending money on it? Not only why am I backing it up, but why is it on my expensive NAS out on the front end as well? Let's use an archive to be able to offload that into cheaper, deeper storage still.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of that brings out that business benefit of being able to reduce cost, whether it's reduce risk or just something, provide something back to the business. So I think that's the differentiator about being able to do something with that data. And I guess that Johnny, is the direct restore to Azure is exactly that, is being able to move your workloads here, there, and everywhere. We're not just focusing on backup and recovery or backup and replication. We're actually focusing on, well, if you need it, it's included in the product. It's included in the free product. So you can just go ahead and have a look, see if it works. And then to your second question about customers, yeah, we've got customers that have gone all in on the cloud, like literally just joined, like just come over to Veeam, and we're protecting all of their Microsoft Azure environment. they have nothing on premises.
Yeah.
But then we obviously do have the on-premises guys that are nervous, anxious about wanting to move any workloads into the cloud. Maybe it's because they're anxious and nervous, or maybe it's because regulations tell them you can't do that because of the nature of their business.
Yeah.
So we have everything and every either end of the spectrum and everything in between as well.
So, I mean, in terms of what you said about the architecture of this, the Veeam product, as it stands today, excuse me, you mentioned that the software is kind of sat on a Windows server, effectively, that's kind of conducting this, and it's communicating with a bunch of agents, whether they're sat on Windows servers as agents or Linux servers. And it's those agents then that are kind of the workhorses, I think is what you called it. They're doing the replication piece. In terms of when we look at protecting stuff that's actually in a cloud platform like Azure, how does the architecture stay the same? So you'd still have a Veeam server sat in your subscription somewhere, or is there something that changes there?
So there's two options, or the same option. So if you're a hybrid approach, let's say you've got some virtualization and you've got some Azure, then that Veeam backup and replication, that brains of the situation, that remains the same. But in Azure, we have our own appliance that is deployed from the marketplace. It's an Ubuntu box, but all self-contained. That can be a standalone box that you manage itself just to manage your Azure VMs, or you also have your on-premises VBR that can talk to that Azure Veeam backup for Azure appliance as well.
Okay. So that appliance that you can deploy from the marketplace, can it work the other way around? Can that communicate with, via an express route? Has it got any limitations there, or?
So that Veeam backup for Azure doesn't have any idea about the on-premises VBR server.
Okay.
It's only the other way around. It's something that we have called platform services. However, the Veeam backup and replication server that I mentioned has to be Windows. That's the big brain.
Yeah.
That's also available in the Azure Marketplace. So you can go and spin that up in the Azure Marketplace as well and have your brain up there, and then have an express route back down on premises.
I see. So basically the appliance that Veeam have got there is purely for protecting Azure resources, that Ubuntu appliance. But then, there's nothing stopping you spinning up a VM, and if it's in the marketplace, even better to have that full Veeam experience, I guess, is what.
Yeah, and I've done, and especially if you're then also sending your backups to Azure object storage, Azure blob storage, and you've got that failure scenario where you need to recover, well, I can just spin up an Azure Marketplace VBR server, Veeam backup and replication server, and start very efficiently directly restoring those machines into Azure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's pretty cool, because at the end of the day, if your data is there residing in a storage account sat in Azure somewhere,
why not?
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty cool. Go on. Sorry, Michael.
So I was going to say, and all of that process, I've automated a lot of that process using PowerShell scripts to be able to do that. From having nothing in Azure, let's say we have nothing in Azure. Let's say we only have an on-premises solution, and this could work for both from a disaster recovery point of view, but also from a migration. Is that, let's say that I'm copying all of my, let's say VMware on premises, just for argument's sake. I'm protecting all of my machines and I'm sending them directly into, or at least a copy of them into object storage. At that point, I can trigger this automation to spin up from the marketplace a VBR instance. We can automate the add-in of the Azure Blob storage, import all of the backups from that, automate the direct restore to Azure VMs, spin them up in the order that you need them, and then you could even add on, I haven't on there, they're the four things, but you could obviously add on to that is now shut down everything that you have on premises. Or the other way around is, which is why I wrote the script, is someone wanted to do that to test their disaster recovery on a monthly basis. So I wrote that script so that they could do that. They could automate that. They could get the big thumbs up to say everything is good over in Azure. Carry on working. We haven't affected anything. We haven't had to stop business, and it took this long. And actually, if we compare this database to this database, we lost 5 tables of data that was written in the time. So it's their exception. Their SLA were defined by that.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I mean, it's great to see. Obviously, looking at third-party products. When you back to what I said at the start, sometimes there's that apprehension where you're thinking, okay, I might need to use that product, but where does it actually sit? What functionality does it actually give me? So that's pretty cool. I mean, in terms of, should we branch out a little bit from sort of VM and image replication at the moment and start looking at, file and folder, if we were looking at the traditional sort of file server backup, because a number of customers I deal with are still very much in that traditional sense, they may be migrating over to the SaaS platform like 365 with, using SharePoint and OneDrive a lot more, and Teams, which I'm sure we'll get to that point with Veeam as well. But from a traditional sense, what kind of bells and whistles does Veeam offer? The traditional, DFSR kind of enabled file system that's sat on many business networks at the moment. Clearly one of the lines that's been touted for a number of years is, well, you might want to shift all of that into some kind of, SaaS platform like SharePoint and move it into Teams and OneDrive, which, lots of companies have. But I think I saw the demo that Shabazz Dar did a couple of months back now about actually migrating data into kind of things like NetApp files within Azure and stuff like that. I mean, that I'd probably just hit on one element of Veeam, but are there other bells and whistles around Veeam, Michael, in terms of that?
Yeah. So NAS Backup actually came out. So NAS Backup, so you think 13 years, 14 years, I think, is how long Veeam's been around, and we've only had NAS Backup for 18 months, and there's a reason for it. And NAS Backup, so any SMB, any NFS, any Windows file server, any Linux file server, we had the ability to protect those servers before, but not in in the same way as NAS. Like NAS Backup is a very different beast, like files and folders, unstructured data in general. So we never had that. So and this is a Veeam trait as well, is that just because we don't have it doesn't mean that we can't do it, but we also don't want to bring something to market that is going to be a big tick in the what do they call them when they're like like when you go like a tender response or something like that. We don't want to
just for the sake of it. Like, I know what you mean. It's just we
want to look at the problem and we want to do something different, or as in more efficient. NAS has been around for a very long time, and just picking up the data and moving it to a backup location using something like NDMP, we could have ticked that box years and years ago. But NDMP is the most inefficient way of being able to protect any NAS environment, whether it's in the cloud, even more so, because it's probably not even available, but also on-prem. So what we came out with is the ability to do something very similar to what we do with virtual machines around change block tracking. Change block tracking, whether it's backing up Azure VMs or whether it's backing up on-prem VMs. But change file tracking, understanding what's changed since the last backup. That was an issue for NDMP. You had to take a dump every single time, and that would take a long time. Your backup window would be exceeded every time, and you'd get all sorts of warnings and failures.
Yeah.
Whereas if we know what's changed, well, then we only need to back up what's changed, because that's an incremental at that point. So then fast forward that into, so yes, got you covered on premises for that. From an Azure point of view, you've got Azure Files, which is generally where you're going to see more unstructured data, more files, folders, like home drives, etc. As we move into that, more applicable to that world of being able to protect the Word documents and the home user drives. But obviously, we have things like Azure NetApp files and being able to protect those, which is generally where you're going to probably see more databases live, and you're going to see more structured data actually reside on that storage. Don't quote me on that, because I'm sure some people use it for home file storage and stuff as well, which is, again, fine. So we've got the ability to protect them. if it's a database, we've got point solutions that enable us to back up those databases, though, in probably a better way than using NAS backup. NAS backup is very much focused on unstructured data, as well as, so there's a new feature that came out at the beginning of this year, which is that instant NAS recovery. So it's SMB only, but this kind of goes to the data classification bit that I just spoke about. And that's, so we've got the backup, you've got your production NAS, and the way this was, I'm going to say marketed, or the way engineering built this was the ability, if something happens to your production NAS, ransomware attack. That's what I demoed actually. Ransomware attack takes down that NAS. Now, none of your users have access to your NAS. They cannot get to their files unless they've got anything locally on their laptops. They can't get to this because your IT team, hopefully, has severed the cord. And now we're just remediating this. We need to get rid of the ransomware so it doesn't spread even further.
Yeah.
Out of action. Now, what Instant NAS Recovery does is allow you to present a read-only copy of your NAS backup on whatever name you need that to be. Mount it wherever you need it to be over SMB so that those users can now get to it. In a read-only state today, we're looking at how that changes while we remediate this. Then when this is remediated, we bring this back online, and then we can drop this and everyone gets back into the read-write access.
Yeah, we do. Cool. Yeah.
So now think about so that was the use case. That was what we marketed. That was exactly the use case in the demo that I did on stage.
Yeah.
The other use case is this NAS is absolutely fine from a production point of view. Let's leave it as is. But now let's take the backup and let's expose that to a third-party data classification engine. Give me the information about the data. We haven't affected any performance here. This is still running.
Okay.
But now I've got insight into what data I'm actually storing. What am I keeping? Sorry for the hand puppets.
That's all right. Yeah.
Better than slides, surely.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
But so that was the I guess one of those areas that came out of a feature that was meant for this.
Yeah.
But nothing's ever, well, the green paint of Veeam is never dry. And anything can change. And I guess that's the best analogy that I can give is that people doing that out in the field today with that instant NAS recovery to understand what that data is.
I mean, when you say that, I think that's probably true of a lot of companies at the moment. Especially, cloud platforms. Look at Microsoft and the innovation that's going through the platform. Anyway, it's just that that ability to be agile and adapt to the market. If all of a sudden your customers are starting to use a particular feature for something that even the engineering team hadn't thought about, it's like, oh, okay, well, you're gonna pick that up and run with it, I guess. That's it's pretty cool that's the way that we're starting to work now, isn't it? I guess. Yeah, difficult to keep up with it though.
Yeah, I guess Bicep and ARM are very, very much from that ilk, right? Being able to take something that was all very innovative anyway from a vendor point of view. Obviously, Microsoft developed Bicep as well, but it just takes elements of ARM and simplifies it even more. From what I know you've done probably a bit more on Bicep than what I have.
Yeah, well, I've done bits and pieces, but yeah, I mean, it's just that feedback, isn't it? So a vendor's open to the feedback from the community, its customers and whatnot, and then building that into the product, I think is just the way that I guess we're all seeing that's how businesses are now operating. Whether you like it or not, if you're not if you're adverse to any change, you're absolutely in the wrong industry now. I mean, it's always been the case, isn't it, in IT that, you're pretty good at dealing with change generally as a person that works in the industry. But I think even more so in this day and age, So, I mean, it's cool to see really how things are adapting. So, I mean, in terms of other product features, Michael, because I know we talked briefly around obviously 365 and the protection of 365. I mean, is that with the same product again off that Windows server, or is that a cloud offering? How does that work?
So it's not the same. So it's not included in Veeam Backup Replication because the persona that looks after Office 365 is not always going to be the same infrastructure or backup admin. We've found that they want that standalone approach to be able to deal with that. Mm-hmm. So it's a standalone. It still has to be on Windows as a management point of view. there is marketplace options to be able to deploy that in Azure as well as some of the other clouds.
Yeah.
But what we've got the ability to do there is, so first and foremost, it was to protect your mail. So your mail online, everyone shifting from Exchange into mail online. Then it was SharePoint. Then it was OneDrive for business. Mm-hmm. And then more recently, it's been around Teams.
Sure.
And this was actually on the roadmap prior to the pandemic. We knew that Teams and backup and granular recovery was coming for Teams, but it was just so happens that Teams blew up in around the pandemic because I don't know about you, but I use it on a daily basis for work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's some interesting options there around VBO or Veeam Backup for Office 365 in that the whole idea, and this, it's not against Microsoft at all because there's a shared responsibility model quite clear in their guidelines, in their terms, is that they will look after that infrastructure, that platform. They will make it available. That software will be available to you for X amount of nines, all of that good stuff. But the data is the customer's responsibility. And that's the important part, is that being able to protect that data. Now, we all make mistakes. We all have accidental deletions. Probably the biggest reason for having a backup is just accidental deletion, making sure that you got all your pictures and all of that good stuff and having a copy of it. Nothing changes when it gets into enterprise SaaS environments. So being able to protect Office 365, mailboxes, etc. So one of the things that we've done already from an Exchange, a SQL, a SharePoint point of view back in the day when we were running these on premises. We still have them today. We have a component called our Veeam Explorers. Sounds like a band. In fact, it was a band, but that's for a different show. And the whole premise of the Veeam Explorers is to dive into, let's call it the database, the SharePoint database, the mail, like the EDB, if you will, from back in the day, or the JetBlue database in Office 365. Being able to open that, crack it open, and be able to see individual items, whether that just be a calendar item, whether it be a contact, whether it be a mail, whether it be a folder. You see it as an inbox, and then you can start recovering individual items out of that, whether it's a list or an object in SharePoint. So we have Veeam Explorer for mail. We have Veeam Explorer for SharePoint. We have it for OneDrive. We have it for Teams. So we can get individual conversations back, which I don't know about you, Johnny, but I don't necessarily... Teams is used for an informal way of being able to discuss and chat. There's not really anything that comes back. But from a legal point of view, if they ever need anything to come back from an e-discovery and a legal perspective, that's invaluable. That's something that, yes, you can get things like that from Microsoft Office 365 as well. But it's about you can already see, like we've spoken about 5 different things that we do from an alliance partnership with Microsoft. There's a lot of crossover. And I think the term that I used a lot is around, like, a lot of us run Windows desktops. We don't always use Windows backup tools to back up our machines. Like, in fact, I've never used the native tool to be able to protect that. So, and also there's nothing there from Microsoft yet today that I'm aware of that allows us to do that. So working together to be able to do that is quite important. And again, it comes down to choice and flexibility for that. But yeah, there's a lot going on around Office 365, and in particular, we're coming up on the next release. I won't give too much away, but VeeamOn's not far away, and you'll hear a lot more. In fact, you're going to hear a lot more about what we're doing for Veeam Backup for Azure, as well as Veeam Backup for Office 365 as well in the releases there.
Well, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm going to stay tuned for that because, I mean, before, in my previous life in consultancy, I was very much involved in the UC and Unified Comms piece. So I was, working with customers to get them over to 365 for a number of years. And you're right. What you said at the front is that I think there's still a lot of customers and a lot of businesses don't realize that actually going to 365 with all your data in your mail and OneDrive isn't necessarily going to give you that backup granularity that you need, and so having these discussions about that product is absolutely paramount to anybody that's looking to go to 365. So I mean, it's cool to see that Veeam has is developing that product even further to get that granularity of recovery and things like that. And I assume, Michael, it's do they operate in a similar way to other vendors in terms of, you get to choose where you want to store that backup. So, spin up an Azure storage account and back all your data up into that storage account, right? Or use a subscription type model. Do Veeam offer similar services?
Yeah, so exactly. So we can go to direct attached storage, or we can go direct to object storage. And that object storage, like with VBR, that can be Microsoft Azure Blob Storage. It could be AWS S3. It could be IBM Cloud. It could be Google, maybe not Google yet. I don't know. Don't quote me on that.
Can't be far away if it's not there, though, surely.
Yeah. S3 compatible storage. So think about your cloudy engines, Adaras, etc. But there's also service providers offering this as a service as well. So being able to so you don't have to manage. So you don't have to manage the underpinning software because you're just consuming the software. That's the whole point of SaaS. And you also, if you go to a service provider, well, they'll look after the data management of that as well. There's some interesting stuff around. So being able to go direct to object storage. There's some. Without going into it, that's exactly the area that is going to be announced in a couple of weeks.
Well, the thing is, this video is probably going to go out after. So we're talking about it in the past. No, but about all that exciting news that was just announced the other day, you mean, Michael? Yeah,
exactly that. Yeah. So,
but no, I mean, that's cool. I mean, it's great to see. Obviously, I'll be marketing this video out there before then anyway. So, anybody that did pick up on, obviously, anything that came out of Veeam On, which is it the 25th, I think it is, isn't it? So,
25th,
yeah. Obviously, that's a week or so away from where we are at the moment. But yeah, as this video goes out, will be probably a couple of days ago. But I mean, in terms of, you mentioned obviously Veeam On is in on the 25th and 26th of May. I know you were speaking at KubeCon was only last week from when we recorded this session, and that kind of takes us into another area again, doesn't it, Michael? In terms of the I suppose, I don't know how you frame it. I just say the modern way of working, the way things are going, the way we're all going to be working in 5 years' time, this whole concept of containerization and Kubernetes. Was that what you were speaking at KubeCon about? Do you want to talk us through a little bit about that?
So I guess I touched on it at the very beginning, so I've been parachuted off into Kasten to focus on their technical community, technical content. I think that gives us a really good insight into, so you've heard the term DevOps, all of that good stuff, and DevOps is really focused on the platform, bringing developers and operations together. I think from a Kubernetes point of view, KubeCon, so yeah, everything last week was about Kubernetes for us, so about Kasten, which is focused on data management within a Kubernetes environment, and very much focused on the application, because that's the nature of Kubernetes, is that we're focusing on that. Mm-hmm. The talk track that we had was around immutability, but a lot of my talk track was around they're the same problems for data management that we have today in our physical world, our virtual world, our cloud world. They're all the same. Accidental deletion, I've mentioned that more than once. Ransomware, I've mentioned that. They're all still applicable when you get into Kubernetes, especially when you start bringing in stateful workloads such as databases, batch processing, message queues, etc. They all have a place in Kubernetes, and only more of this will happen later on. So but the interesting thing around KubeCon, because this is my first KubeCon, especially first KubeCon speaking as well, Johnny. And I think I was like, all as always, imposter syndrome was there. And it's a bit like, well, they're going to know a lot more than me. And by them, I mean everyone out in front of me in this virtual stage. Yeah. But actually, like, you get speaking to this community, same community, maybe the same people.
Lots of overlap. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And actually, no, we're all at, I've been telling this story as well, is that if you think about a climb to Mount Everest, you don't just land you don't land your plane at base camp and then start climbing the mountain. You've got a couple of days to get from the airport to base camp. And I think this whole journey of learning and using this platform we're very much still on the way to Basecamp, and only then will that adoption rate start going up. And I think that's interesting. But also, I've seen a lot of, and this wasn't so apparent last week. I think it's more, and I'm going to call us as a collective platform operators, or we're the ones that look after the infrastructure. We're the infrastructure admins. We're the backup admins, cloud engineers, SREs, etc. And I think there's a common misconception that it's VMs or containers, or cloud VMs versus containers. And it's not that at all. And it needs to be. In fact, another thing that I say is just go to Google now. Don't close the video. Just go open another tab and go to Google. And if you type in containers and VMs, everything that comes up on that first page is containers versus VMs. And it's completely different. It's like when you're moving house, you're not going to use a motorbike to move your furniture. You're going to use a lorry. And if you want to go really fast, you're going to buy a fast car or a motorbike. There's choices. There's flexibility. Virtualization's not going away. Physical hasn't gone away. Cloud's definitely not going away. Kubernetes cloud container orchestration is just joining the pack. And it just means that we've got more choice to that. And that was my biggest light bulb moment from last week, Johnny, is that, there's no verses here. It's we all need to know. We need to know about Kubernetes and the benefits that it brings, but it doesn't, we've got a new workload, or we've got this new project. It has to be Kubernetes. No, that doesn't need to be the case. It just needs to be, we need to know the benefits, or we need to know the advantages and the disadvantages to that platform. And that was my big light bulb moment last week.
Do you know, I completely agree with that. I think that's definitely something I've learned over the last sort of 6 to 8 months or so is, speaking with other community members like yourself, Michael, and on these areas, you do see these technologies and think, oh my, do I need to go rush out and learn that now? Is that my new job? And you're right. It is exactly that. It's about having that big kit bag of things that you can do. But I think the art is in understanding, like you say, what the benefits are of each, and really placing them for the right particular scenario or otherwise. So, I mean, in terms of what you were speaking about, and certainly from obviously from a point of view of Kasten and what those guys are offering now in terms of being able to back up and obviously put DR and business continuity planning in place, is that something that has got a quick overview, Michael, in terms of what the offerings are there from Kasten?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost is, so from a containerization point of view, being able to protect less around stateless configurations, but still a point and still a use case there, because people have potentially dived into this and they've now got configuration coming out of their ears and potentially many different namespaces, applications all running. There's a time and a place where if you're not leveraging continuous integration, continuous deployment, where backup might make a bit more sense there. But really the focus for Kasten is around stateful workloads, such as like your databases, your NoSQL and your SQL relational databases, being able to protect them, messaging queues, batch processing, etc., being able to protect that state. That's very much a growing trend. I think Kubernetes 5 years ago was completely framed at web scale, like web server farm type deployments. And it was very much stateless workloads. The container contained what it contained. I think I just said that 3 times. But that was it. The code was the code, and it allowed you to pull down the image, and it had everything. The image had everything in to serve the purpose that it was there for.
Yeah.
Then fast forward 2 or 3 years to now, and maybe even 18 months ago, is that adoption now is, well, I can run MongoDB within my Kubernetes cluster, and I can scale out the pods and the application around that. Well, in doing that, that state is not controlled by any version control. It is completely, like, we still need to back that up. Like we do databases on-prem, in the cloud, wherever they are, we still need to protect them. So databases first and foremost, then other areas like Kafka, like Aurora, things like those services are also like new and upcoming in terms of them running alongside or within Kubernetes. So
Yeah.
That's
So I
really
mean,
the
my
focus.
my layman's way of looking at Kubernetes or containerization, I guess, is in terms of an actual container image itself. When you've got that in a container registry somewhere, are we looking to do anything with that in terms of backup, or are we just comfortable that we leave that in whatever the service is, whether that be ACR within Azure or even Docker? Dare I say, just in a Docker container registry. I mean, does Kasten do anything with that actual image itself? So I guess if you, rather than downloading maybe a marketplace image of a particular thing like MongoDB or storage account or whatever it might be, if you put a lot of time and effort into a particular image and you've developed your own application or microservice on that image, are we looking to protect that in some way with a backup plan, or are we just dropping that into a container registry and being done with it?
So I think that's a super interesting. Like, now we're talking about source code and protecting the version control.
Mm.
And I think I've had many discussions with like engineering teams around that area, because by all accounts we're focused on not that container piece. We're focused on the data gets to the other end and not the source code. But I've always said that what happens if GitHub goes down?
Yeah.
Like, where is all your stuff? And especially like GitHub have their own container registry now. Obviously Docker that you mentioned, there's container registries everywhere.
Mm.
And you pick and choose what and where you want to store your images. Now, the images itself should be pretty stateless, but ultimately you need to be able to pull them down though from somewhere. Kasten, for example, is a group of images that we pull down to deploy. It's very simple to deploy, but they live on images. If that image repository is not available, well, then you're not deploying Kasten.
Well, I mean, I've actually got a real world example here where it's based on, is because, you've seen my musings over the last few months, I'm sure, Michael, in terms of what I've been playing with. But I got focused onto IoT and IoT Edge, which fundamentally, is running a set of, if you look at Azure IoT Edge, it's running a set of containers basically on a small form factor PC. Effectively, it's just running those containers. One of the containers I was using was an NVIDIA built container, pre-packaged container that did some video analytics. And yes, NVIDIA have absolutely got their own container registries. But do you think it was up and running when I wanted to do my bit of work that I was playing on? It wasn't. So what I found myself doing was copying a container of somebody else that had stored it in their own personal Docker container registry. And as I'm doing this, I'm thinking, well, this is great for me as a hobbyist or a tinkerer or just learning these technologies. But actually, NVIDIA, I'm not blowing NVIDIA out the water here at all. I'm sure, I as I understand, it does go down every now and again with their container registry. But as this matures, clearly there's some opportunity there to do something a bit more. I'm not saying it's not robust at the minute, far from it. But, in those instances where something is offline for whatever reason, actually, do we need almost like a replication of that container registries in a bit like the agnostic, the multi-cloud thing, isn't it? Well, if that container registry is offline, and I appreciate I probably drifted way from where, Kasten is talking, but yeah, I just found it interesting at the time when I was playing with that, and those thoughts crossed my mind.
Yeah, no, hugely, Johnny. So I wrote a blog probably 3 years ago now. This is we only acquired Kasten in October of last year. We've been working with them for the last 18 months or 12 months before that. But I wrote a blog ages ago that was focusing on backing up my own GitHub repositories.
Okay.
Because it's a similar thing, right? Not so much container images or container repositories or registries, but what about all of those PowerShell scripts, like the hacking scripts that I've put together that make things work? Okay, GitHub's pretty robust, but I use that as my source control. If I go anywhere, I want to curl that down and I want to start working with that script on whatever machine that may be. What happens if GitHub's not available or GitHub loses that data? Because I imagine there's a responsibility clause in there that says, well, actually, everything that you put on here might be lost one day, or the data is your responsibility. So I think there's an important and all I was doing was I was running I still am. It's a scheduled task to clone all of my repositories local and then take a backup with Veeam NAS backup, or even at that point we didn't have NAS backup. It was just file to disk, like a simple copy and basically robocopy with a UI.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I was taking a backup of that, so I had a copy of that data locally. Now, I think this is a super interesting conversation to be had, and I think a lot of the question comes when you speak to DevOps engineers, actually people who are writing that source code, developing the continuous integration wheel. What do you do if you lose an element of that? Like whether it's the platform or whether it's your code. What happens if you make a monument? And a lot of the answers that I get is, well, I've got it stored on my laptop. Yeah, but
well, do you know what? This is got one of these funny coughs, but these are the kind of things that I guess, for the amount of abstraction that's going on in the industry. I know we're probably drifting a little bit away from the backup and replication, but the more easier things are becoming in terms of accessibility and democratization and, just being able to jump in with a free account and getting things up and running, I'm finding things are becoming more complicated. And I'm sure everybody else is, in terms of, because we've got so many different ways of doing that, and because there are so many different disciplines in IT and there's so much overlap, you'll find that people are doing things. And to say it frankly, my gut feel is that there are lots of gaps that are being missed in terms of, okay, internally I work for a company that, has their own, it's a GitLab set of servers, SQL backend databases, any code that's developed, it's on there. It's being backed up and controlled internally in the traditional sense. Yeah. That could live in a cloud platform. But yeah, certainly when you're talking about cloud platforms like GitHub, and it comes up in conversation in terms of, when we're developing new solutions or doing some migration activities with a customer, do they have DevOps processes in terms of, do they want to go into this whole infrastructure as code way of working? Or do they not want to? Do they want to put it into managed service? There's all of these questions that get asked. And I think, my unspoken rule is basically GitHub is meant for your, individual, personal, just chuck it up there, make it public if you want. And it's up to you if you leave it there, make it public or private. I'm saying this, obviously biting my tongue a little bit, because absolutely there's some fantastic things going on and absolutely mind-blowing stuff going on. But I'm not sure how that translates into the kind of the business world at the moment. There's certainly this kind of conversation that people see it more of a hobbyist thing, but then equally we know there's huge things going on, and it's just interesting when you boil it back down to, like you just say, how do you back that up, and how do you make sure that actually, if GitHub were to just turn its servers off tomorrow, what would you do? So it's really, it is an interesting, and it's the same for containers. It's the same kind of principles, isn't it? Where our source code, our container images that we may have built, or images, we store those somewhere. And I'm not saying this from any great voice of experience. My experience with containerization is minimal. I like I say to people, I know enough to be dangerous, but same.
But but I think you're spot on, Johnny. And like we come from similar backgrounds, infrastructure backgrounds, right?
Yeah.
And we're thinking about that, and I wonder how many developers are thinking, and that's no disrespect to a developer or a DevOps engineer.
No, not at all. Yeah, I think
because they just don't. And I've been saying this a lot as well. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And by all accounts, GitHub hasn't gone down, or Bitbucket hasn't gone down, or they haven't gone down for a long term. They haven't gone there's not been a catastrophic failure, which hopefully it never happens. Then we don't ever have to have this problem. The whole point of backup, though, isn't you don't buy backup because of it might not happen. Insurance, I haven't bought car insurance because I know I'm going to smash my car up. I've bought it because it could happen.
Yeah.
House insurance because it could happen. So
it's such a it's when you start having these kinds of conversations with like-minded people, and clearly, like we say, we're from a similar kind of cloth in terms of our backgrounds in IT, Absolutely. From the dev side of things, yeah, it's no disrespect whatsoever. But sometimes when you're like, the way I tend to see it is that operations folk are kind of very broad across a solution and working towards getting something up and running, keeping it running. And then dev are very much in the detail of what that particular application or service or whatever it is that they're developing. So
Yeah.
it is two different worlds fundamentally. And, this is the whole point of DevOps, isn't it? Is that, the two come together, and in theory, all of these questions need some form of an answer. And I guess that's what I meant, in terms of things are becoming more abstracted, but that kind of fills me with a little bit of, people don't know the underlying what's going on. Do you know what I mean? A little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we had the same thing when virtualization was very new as well. I think you always have them people that want to start climbing that mountain and get up that mountain as fast as possible.
Yeah.
But in doing that, there's a massive gap in between the masses.
Yeah.
And you potentially miss areas, you miss things.
Yeah.
And I think I would hang my hat on is that DevOps is a culture. DevOps is a movement of developers coming to our side of the park, maybe the side of the road. Yeah. And I think we're now at this point where the platform operators, the infrastructure admins are also moving to the other side. But developers they're already years into that world around CI/CD pipelines, workflows, etc.
Yeah.
And speaking to that, it's not about calling them out for missing stuff. It's about bringing our knowledge of, look, failures do happen. And there also is a big iceberg underneath everything that you put your stuff on. There's a lot of complexity underneath that. So I use the example again around a developer. A developer knows storage to the database. They don't know about the iceberg underneath that goes into that. And you could put that analogy over a lot more areas around backup and around security, and I think that's why you're seeing some amazing security efforts in this world around, like the likes of Sneak, for example. They're making sure that those container images are vulnerability free of any vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So they're thinking about that, and developers are allowing that in. So DevSecOps is then born, and I've even read this morning, I was reading about Dev Data Ops. So where we're increasing, and I've been doing a lot around my play time at the moment has been around continuous deployment, because backup, for your point, Johnny, would be potentially included in maybe the continuous integration, or maybe it's at the end of continuous integration as it gets into continuous deployment, where we look at the source repository and we start looking at what's happened since it's been passed, and then it's been landed into that public repository. Let's start protecting it there, because that's when people might use it. But the same for backup is, a developer doesn't care about a UI and doesn't care about policies or backup jobs. They just want to know that if they implement a change, that they're going to be protected. They don't know that they can be protected, because so my demo last week, another demo that I did at KubeCon, was integrating backup into your GitOps, another culture or whatever. But integrating that, because all it is that before we commit any new code change to our deployment, let's take a backup. I don't even have to go into the UI. I just want to leverage Kubernetes APIs to take a backup every time I commit a new change, whether that's anything, whether I scale out, whether I add some configuration maps, anything like that. Let's just take a backup, because then we know that we've got a good point in time, recovery point, before we made that code change that could have broke everything. And that's exactly what my demo did. I went and broke the data. And then obviously I had a backup, so it's all good. Recover. Now let's fix it. There'll be a YouTube video for that as well. Hopefully by the time this recording's out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. To be honest, Michael, I said, didn't I, at the beginning, how long I like to try and get these videos. We're an hour and 10 already. We can go on and on and on.
Jeez.
It's great. It's great. I mean, it's really good to chat around these things, especially in the context of, focusing in on that backup and disaster recovery, arena effectively, and how Veeam and Kasten are looking at kind of trying to address some of the, what. Yeah, it's like you say, people just expect that to happen. They don't, and don't get me wrong, people obviously know that there are this team of brain boxes behind the scenes working out the most efficient and easy way of doing it. But I wouldn't call backup boring. I know what you're saying, but I think it's one of those necessities that you kind of, the more people know and know what options are available and why certain things are in place, the happier everybody should be in their job, knowing what's going on when they put that data there. Well, actually, what needs to happen to make sure that data stays there or can be put back there in the worst case scenario? So, I mean, it's a fascinating area, really, isn't it? So, or maybe that's just the geek in me, is it? I don't know.
No, you've absolutely nailed it. I say it's boring, but clearly I'm still here. I'm still talking about it on a daily basis because it massively interests me in that I don't understand why the two biggest areas of any environment, whether you're talking virtual cloud, whatever, always at the bottom of the exciting pile is security and backup, and maybe monitoring as well.
And well, I don't know. Governance comes in there somewhere as well, doesn't
it? Yeah, I can't believe maybe that I can't get behind that. Maybe governance is boring, but they're the three most important aspects to any environment, and yet they're at the bottom of the shopping list.
100%, yeah, and it's a strange thing, isn't it? I think, and I don't know, is it? We won't drone on about this too much longer, I think, but is it not because of the culture we're in now with cloud technologies being click deploy, and then all these other things? Oh yeah, by the way, you might want to back that up, and you might want to put some DR plan, and yeah, we got all of this other stuff for security, but you can click this button and you're up and running in seconds. And is that not what customers and maybe non-technical people are seeing a lot more of? So this expectation level is being raised to, oh, well, if I go to the cloud, it's all easy, isn't it? It's all, well, you just do this template and it runs away and deploys everything for me. I'm speaking from experience there, of course, because I come across that a lot. Yeah. And, you kind of have to kind of say, yeah, it can be easy. But to get to that point where it's easy, you've got to learn a lot of things. And this is where, in my opinion, this is where governance, security, backup, all of the stuff absolutely that is needed for a proper, production ready and production grade solution and system absolutely needs to be thought of. And you need to have those, bits of the pie and bits of the puzzle all in place before you click that button that's easy, and it's a fascinating conversation, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah, it always is. And it's only going to get even more, you can call it overwhelming or more interesting. Either way, whatever side of the fence you are, that's where it's going.
I think the attitude, we've just got to embrace it, isn't it? In that we've just got to embrace it and make the best that we can with it. And like you say, I mean, certainly DevOps in the culture is absolutely not about pointing fingers at people. It's not about that. It's absolutely, look, we've all got different experiences, and where we've got those experiences from, more often than not, have got a valid voice. They've got a valid thing to be said. Now, the more that we can speak to different people in different areas of the industry, the more cohesive these solutions become at the end of the day. And I think that's probably what we're going through at the moment, isn't it? Is that we're all, in our different skills and professions, we're all kind of speaking with each other more and understanding each other's areas a little bit more. And some of these big questions are dropping out, like, oh yeah, what are we doing about that? Oh, okay. And then we've got a solution for it. So yeah, it's pretty cool. But I mean, any parting words, Michael? I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat. It's been really, really good. I've loved what I've learned about Veeam. I'm going to take a look more of Kasten now off the back of this. And yeah, if you're watching this now, watch the videos from Veeam on from a couple of days ago.
Yeah. So for me, no, nothing to add. I think I've said enough. But yeah, no, awesome conversation. I think there are many different rabbit holes that we can get into about our world, about the community in general. I feel like the IT industry is becoming an even bigger community, with the DevOps march or movement. I think that whole inclusive, being able to speak to everyone about everything and not being criticized for certain things. I think that's also a big part of why we're all getting on, and that's a big thing about how we all make it better for each other.
Yeah,
So
100%. Yeah, I completely agree.
It's a big friendly community.
Well, it is. It is. It's a great community at the end of the day, and yeah, it's great to be part of it. And look, we probably wouldn't have even spoke, in this format had it not been for that. So no, I mean, on that note, Michael, we'll call it a day there. It's been great to have you on. Obviously, this will be going out, in a few weeks' time. Well, obviously it's out now if you're watching it on YouTube or whatever. But yeah, I'll obviously keep you posted. And if you want to, I say it to everybody, but drop me a couple of links of important bits and pieces. I'll stick them in the article and stick them below as well, so everybody's got access to them.
Awesome.
Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining me, Michael.
No worries. Pleased to be here. I didn't realise how long it had taken, but yeah, all good.
Oh, yeah, hour and 15, and we'll call it a day there. See you soon. Thanks, Michael.
See you later. Thanks.